Today's Daf Yomi is Kesubos 11a. So the Gemara tells us as follows: Hagiores v'Shavuya. A Giores is a woman who converted. A Shavuya. Shavuya is a captured woman. V'Shifcha, and a slave, a maid slave. Sheniftu, that they were redeemed, i.e., that they were in captivity. And then the assumption there is that when you're in captivity, that your virginity is compromised. Vishaniskaru, or they converted. Vishanishtakru, or they were freed. Less than 3 years old. Meaning, if they did all these things under the age of 3, we're going to give them the ksuba of a virgin, and which is 200 zuz. And also, in those circumstances, we're going, if they get married and the husband says that you weren't a virgin, he can make a legitimate complaint because he was expecting her to be a virgin. So we see from here that under the age of 3, we believe the virginity can grow back. The Gemara is going to say later on, it's like poking a finger in the eye. You make tears, but then you make new tears. So the virginity grows back under the age of 3. So the Gemara's assumption here is that how is a child converting under the age of 3? A child has no agency. So if a child is a minor, how can they convert, right? So the Gemara explains, Amar Avhuna, Ger Katan Matpiun also al das bezdin. That let's say there's a Ger Katan, a minor, we immerse this minor al das bezdin with the consent of the court. Meaning to say the court does the conversion. The court is the one who immerses the child in the mikvah. That's what Rashi says. Rashi says if there's no father, and the mother brings him to convert. Everybody's bothered by this Rashi. What do you mean? Why does it have to be the mother brings him? Why can't you just say if there's no father or mother and the court converts him? So some want to say that Rashi was forced to say this because the censors put this in. Otherwise, it's like the Jews are going around kidnapping homeless children. There was a whole book read this book by Boswell called The Lost Children, about all the children in the Middle Ages who were lost. They didn't have a social service system. They used to just drop the kids. You can imagine if the kid had some sort of medical issue or the family was poor, they would just drop the kid somewhere. So then those were my theory is that those kids were then connected to the kids who they accused the Jews of doing a blood libel on, because there were all these kids missing, and then they didn't want to admit that they dropped their kid because who knows what was associated with a kid that was unhealthy. So they blamed the Jews for that. Anyway, so we see from here it says Rav Huna doesn't connect it to our Mishnah yet, but Rav Huna says that if a minor wants to convert, the court is the one who immerses him. So the Gemara says, what's it telling us? This chutulo, that this is a merit for the court to convert the child, that it's a merit to be Jewish. Is that the teaching? That even though the child has no agency, we're telling him that it's a schut, it's a great merit to become Jewish, and therefore the court can assume that the child will want to be Jewish, and therefore you can accept something, a merit on behalf of somebody else, even though they're not there. We have this concept, that if I want to give money to person C, person B can accept it, because for sure person C is going to want that money. So you could say so, and so therefore becoming Jewish is a schus also. Imagine yesterday. So, but the Gemara says, but it can't be that that's what it's teaching us, because Tanina Zachar Adam Shelo B'fanav Vein Chavam Adam Shelo B'fanav. So we say, but we learned in the Mishnah that we already know this idea that you can accept something, that you can do a schus, a merit on something for somebody without them being in their presence, but you can't accept an obligation, a chov, a demerit, without their being in their presence. So what's Rav Huna even teaching us? So the Gemara says, Mao Detema, Ove Kochavim Be'afkeir Nichla. You might have thought that this idolater is not a schus for him. He'd rather be without the commandments. Well, when he's Jewish, he can't eat pork. When he's Jewish, he's not allowed to sleep with some random person. When he's Jewish, he has to fast on Yom Kippur. So you might have thought the idolater prefers the Hefker Nichole, the Kaimelon, the Eved Vadei B'Hefker Nichole, because we have a principle: the slave for sure prefers not to have these laws. Kamash Mo'an, immediately gadol. When do we apply this by an adult? The tam isura, because he's already tasted the pork, he's tasted the shellfish, he knows what it's like. He doesn't want to accept these laws upon himself. Avokatan, but a minor, is chutulo. A minor, it's a merit for him to become Jewish. The poskim say that this is only if the minor is going to be raised in a family where there's Shabbos, where there's kashrus, where he's getting a Jewish education. So he's going to do the mitzvah. So he's going to get up into the world to come. He's going to have olam haba. But if you're going to take this child and then you're going to raise him in a family where there's no mitzvahs, then what schus is it for him? You're now that he's Jewish and he doesn't keep Shabbos, he's going to be punished. Now that he's Jewish, he doesn't keep kosher, he's going to be punished. So now that he's Jewish and he doesn't have hair, he's going to be punished. So it's only a merit. The bezdin can only convert the child if the child is going to be raised in a Jewish environment. Otherwise, it's not a schus for the child. It's a demerit for the child. So the Gemara says, "Lema Messiah." Let's bring a proof for Rav Huna's position that the katan, that the minor can be converted by the bezdin. What's the proof? It says in our Mishnah, it says in our Mishnah, it refers to the Giores, these people, these converts, the slaves, that they were redeemed less than 3 years old in one day. So how could they be converted? My love, it must be the case that it must be that the court converted them, that the linol das bezdin. How else do you have a child convert? It must be that the court converted him. The Gemara says, no. The Gerish and the Skyru bundled with the notes of emo. No, it's where somebody came and converted with his whole children. A man converted with his sons and daughters with him, because it's not a case. The nichulu, we know that the child wants it. The nichulu b'mayda of it everyone, because we know the child will for sure want it because he wants to be with his father. So that's not a case where it's al das bezdin. Everybody knows that it's for the welfare of the child. Seems a little bit of a forced answer to me because somebody still has to put him in the mikveh there, but that's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef then teaches us a fundamental idea. That when this child gets older, he's able to reject the conversion. He can reject it. So he said, even if they converted with their father, he could say, I don't want to be Jewish. I want to go back to being an idolater. And we can't, and the court can't punish him. And if after that he said he betroths a woman, she doesn't even need a get. That's Rav Yosef's Chiddush. So Abaye challenges him from our Mishnah. It says, it says in our Mishnah that any of these kids who converted less than 3 years old, their Kesubos 200 zuz. We just said their Kesubos 200 zuz. And if you want to say, okay, he divorces her and he gives her 200 zuz, and now she could say, actually, I don't want to be Jewish. I'm rejecting the whole thing. You don't have to give a ksuba to a non-Jew. If that's not considered a marriage, you're going to give her 200 zuz. She's going to consume it while she's not Jewish. That's not. That doesn't make sense. So the Gemara says, no, it means luchigadra. No, it means that what's going on is you don't give her the ksuba until she becomes an adult. So the Gemara says, luchigadra nami mimchaya b'nafka. But why can't she reject faith when she becomes an adult? The Gemara says, no. Kiven she dila sha'achas v'al milchta shuv einei chol imchus. A very important concept. Once she becomes an adult for one moment, then she can no longer reject the marriage. She can no longer reject the faith. This is a very important concept, which to this day there's not 100% consensus. What does it mean? Because if she can reject it only for one moment, but the second she's an adult, she can't reject it anymore. So what does it mean? So there's differences of opinion, but the consensus about the poskim today is that you give the kid who converts as a child, once they turn 12 or 13, you give them one opportunity to reject it, and that's it. That's the consensus. So the Gemara says, Mosef Rava, So before we had the Eisvei of Abaye, now we have the Eisvei of Rava. Rava challenges it from later on in our Gemara. So we learned in the Mishnah Daf Koftes. The Mishnah tells us that if you have a Nara, a girl from between the ages of 12 to 12 and a half, who she's Rahman al assaulted, then you have to pay a fine of 50 shekel. And these are the ones who get the knas. Habala mamzeres. Val Nasina, Val Kunsis, Val Gioris, Val Shvuya, Val Shifpa, Shanifti, Mishin Shkara, Mishin Shtachar, Pachal, Kusus, Mibno, Shal, Shanam, Yom Echad. Yesh, like Knas. All these categories, this mamzeres, or this girl who converted when she was less than 3 years old and 1 day. So they get the fine, and you have to give them a fine. But so it says Rava, the Amris deal Yachol and Limkos, and if you could say that she can reject her faith when she gets older, it's the same question. So why are you paying her the fine? She's no longer Jewish. She rejected it. Why did you have to pay her the fine? She's not Jewish anymore. So the Gemara says, no, chigadol means you pay her the fine after she gets to become an adult. So the Gemara says, well, chigadol, not in the but she also rejected when she was an adult. So how does that help anything? She could also reject the marriage at that point, and you already gave her the fine. So the Gemara says, no. The same exact Gemara. So once she becomes an adult, for one moment, she can't reject it anymore. So Abaye and Rava both basically ask the same question on Rav Yosef. And Abaye's question is from, however, the case of our Mishnah, where it says that you give her a ksuba of 200. But if she can reject it, why are you giving her a ksuba of 200? And Rava's question is the case of a knas, where you give her the penalty of 50 shekel. But if she can reject being Jewish, why do you give her the penalty? So the Gemara says, why didn't Abaye raise Rava's question? Abaye lo over Karava, Hasam Kanasa. Abaye doesn't raise the question from Rava because he says there it's logical to assume that even though she's not Jewish, she might still have to pay the fine. Hasam Kanasa, there we want him to pay, even though later on she can reject it because he did something wrong. We don't want the sinner to have a benefit. We don't want a sinner to have a benefit. There's a law like this in America that if you commit a crime, you can't write a book about your crime and get the royalties from it. We don't want this concept of chote niskar. You've done something wrong, you can't benefit from it. Whereas Rava says, well, Amar Abaye, because Rava doesn't. What does Rava give Abaye's question? He says, Kesuva hainu taima. What's the reason? What's the reason for the Kesuva? Shalote kala be'enaf hotzia, because we don't want to make it too easy for him to divorce her. And so therefore, you can imagine why you would have this, you have to pay the Kesuva even though she can reject it later. So therefore, Rava asked the question from the Kenas. Okay, with me? Okay, so now the Gemara says, we're up to the Mishnah on the bottom of Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph at the bottom, says, Zak the Gemara, Zak the Mishnah Agadol, Sheba Ketana. Let's say you have an adult who has relations with a minor. Agadol Sheba Ketana V'Katan Sheba Agadol. Or you have an adult. Well, Rashi tells us, what are we talking about? That he has relations with the minor. She's less than 3 years old. So it's not considered to be destroying her virginity because it's going to grow back. Or a katan who's less than 9 years old, and the sages say that his intercourse is not considered intercourse, who has relations with an adult. Mukas 8. What's Mukas 8? That her besuas, her hymen, was destroyed by a piece of wood. So she didn't have intercourse, but her hymen is no longer intact. So in all those cases, ksuvasa masayim. If she marries a man afterwards, she doesn't lose the ksuva of the virgin, which is 200. They just got married. You can always specify in the ksuba whatever you want. But let's say they just didn't specify. The ksuba is 200. That's what it means. It's like the ksuba of a virgin. Whereas the Chachamim say, the Chachamim say that if she was really wounded by a piece of wood, Ksuva san mana. Her ksuva is 100. That her ksuva is 100. Besua almana grusha lachalutza minas nisuin ksuva san mana. Let's say you're a virgin who's a widow or a divorcee or chalutza from the nisuin ksuva san mana. Meaning to say you got married And before you went to the chuppah, you had the big party, but before you get home, the groom drops dead during the dancing. So she's still a virgin. So then she wants to remarry. Say her ksuba is still 100. We're not going to give her the 200. Even though she's a virgin, if she's a widow or divorcee or chalutza, we're going to give her 100. Say once we have a presumption that once you get married, you're considered to be no longer a virgin. And we're on top of 11b, and also under those circumstances, the husband cannot claim, I expected her to be a virgin. So all these categories, the woman who converted, the captive, the slave, who were redeemed, all those cases, if it was more than 3 years old in one day, then we're going to assume that they're not a virgin, and the husband cannot claim, I expected her to be a virgin. So, because the assumption is that when she was older than 3 years old, if she was not Jewish or under Jewish control, she's no longer a virgin. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Katan Haba Gedola, Asam Lukas Eitz. So Rabbi Yehuda Marav teaches us a chiddush. He says that let's say there's a minor under the age of 9. He said his intercourse is not considered intercourse, but he's going to still destroy her basula, but like the same way a piece of wood destroys her basula. Rashi says, granted his intercourse is not intercourse, nevertheless, he's not worse. He's not worse than a piece of wood that damages her. And according to the Rabbanan, who say that a mukas eitz, the ksuvasa is a mana. Rabbi Meir said the ksuva is 200, but the Rabbanan say that the ksuva is 100. And so therefore that's what he's saying. That's what Rab is saying. That granted, if it's a 9-year-old, his intercourse is not intercourse, but according to the Rabbanan, her ksuva is only going to be 100. And also, we learned in Yevamos that a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, is not allowed to marry a mukas eitz. So he wouldn't be allowed to marry her. When this din was said in front of Shmuel, he says, Ein mukas eitz bebasar. He says that if it happens from a human being, from a boy, it's not going to be considered like the wood injured her. And so, if it's not considered intercourse, it's also not considered mukas eitz. Some learned this teaching by its own, meaning to say without Rav teaching it. And how did they learn it? Let's say there was meaning they didn't learn that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, but Rav or the name of Shmuel, but that Rav and Shmuel themselves argued about it. Because they say, Katan Abal Agdol, if there's a minor who has relate intercourse with an adult, Rav Amar Asa Mukas Eitz. Rav says she's like a Mukas Eitz, and therefore, according to Chachamim, she would only get a ksuba of 100. Shmuel Amar a Mukas Eitz Basar. Shmuel says there's no Mukas Eitz by a person. So if she's not a Be'ula, she's also not a Mukas Eitz. So now we said, Ma'asev Rav Oshaya. So Rav Oshaya challenges from our Mishnah on Rav. Again, what does Rav say? That if it was a 9-year-old, less than 9, who had intercourse with the adult, then she's considered to be a mukas eitz. So Ma'asev Rav Oshaya from our Mishnah, it says, Gadol Shabbat Ketana, B'Katan Haba Gdula, Mukas eitz Ksuvas Masayim, Divrei Rabbi Meir, V'Chamim Omer Mukas eitz Ksuvas Mana. So according to Rabbi Meir, that if the katan comes on is with an adult, and also a mukas eitz, and from the Rashi explains when we did Talginu Tano Atarti, from the fact that the Tana of the Mishnah divides these two cases into two separate instances. Below ifig Rabbanan Ela b'mukas eitz, and the rabbis only argue in the case of the mukas eitz, because the rabbis say by mukas eitz the ksuba is 100. Shmamina, we learn from here, a mukas eitz b'basar. We learn from here that the rabbis are saying that if it actually comes from a person, it's not considered a mukas eitz. You can't have mukas eitz from a person. So this is a question on Rav. So Amar Rava Hachikamar. No, this is what our Mishnah is saying. This is what our Mishnah is saying. And so Rava first explains the first cause of our Mishnah. If there's an adult who has relations with a minor who is less than 3 years old, that's not considered intercourse at all. The pachos mikam, because less than 3 years old, can no same etzba ba'ayin dami. It's like you're sticking your finger in somebody's eye. It's nothing. Vekatan habala gedola, and if there's a minor who has relations with a minor boy who has relations with an adult woman, also mukas eitz makes her into a mukas eitz, meaning this person who was injured by wood.
Isn't the whole thing about mukas eitz like it happens by accident? Right.
Well, mukas eitz is, well, maybe that's the core of the dispute. I think very nice, but mukas eitz is that is it that it happened by accident, or is it that the hymen was ruptured not through intercourse? So maybe that's the core of the dispute. If we would dig down deeper to understand what are they really arguing about, maybe that's really what they're arguing about here. So, but it's a good point. Like you have to understand, like, what is the definition of mukas eitz? Like if it happens in a sexual manner, but not the exact definition of intercourse, is it still considered mukas eitz? That's what Rav is saying. Whereas Shmuel says, no, it's not mukas eitz there. So the Gemara says that, going back to Rava, that Rava says mukas eitz kufa pukta to Rabbi Meir v'Rabbanan, and the mukas eitz itself, that's a dispute between Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan. Rabbi Meir says mukas eitz the Kesubos Masayim, and the Chum say it's 100, and so that's how Rav would explain the Mishnah. So Amar Rabbi Bar Chama machokes kishehikir ba. So he says this machokes between Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan, whether or not the mukas eitz is 200, which is what Rabbi Meir say, or 100 like the Rabbanan, that when he married her and he wrote her a ksuva, he knew that she was mukas eitz. He says, I know that your hymen is broken, and yet he still marries her. Rabbi Meir medami leila bogeres. Rabbi Meir says that she's like a bogeres. Excuse me. What's a bogeres? A bogeres is a girl over the age of 12 and a half. And there we have the assumption, we learned this in Masechet Yevamos, that since she's so old, she's 12 and a half, her basula has disintegrated. Her hymen has disintegrated. And so therefore, nevertheless, even though she's a bogeres, her basula is still 200, even though her basula is disintegrated. So Rabbi Meir says that this mukas eitz is like a bogeres. And the rabbis say no. The rabbis say no. She's like a woman who's like a girl who's already had intercourse, and so therefore, since she did some action, she stuck a stick in herself and she destroyed the basulas. Therefore, suba is 100. But let's say he didn't know that she was mukas eitz and he got married to her, expecting her to have her basula intact. Then we're going to say, everybody would say she gets nothing. Everybody would say she gets nothing because even a 100 she doesn't get, because he's marrying her, expecting her to have the basula, which is 200, which is complete, and she has nothing. So then what's called a mekachtos, a mistaken transaction.
Is it possible that she doesn't know that her hymen's broken, or that's not possible?
So Isaac is asking a good question. Isaac is saying, is it possible that she doesn't know her hymen is broken? Sure, that's possible. And would that matter if she herself doesn't know? Would that matter? So that's a very good question. But I'm assuming it wouldn't matter. The assumption is not that she tricked him, but that he did it, that he was expecting one thing. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, so the Gemara asked the question, Rabbi Meir, why does Rabbi Meir say that if she's a mukas eitz, she's comparable to a bogeres whose basula has disintegrated? Why don't we compare her to a ba'ula, to a girl who's had intercourse already, and therefore it's 100? The Gemara says no, because ba'ula is sabab b'maisa b'dei adam, because by a girl who's had intercourse, there was an action from a human being. Although it's either by Adam. And in this case, there was no action by a human being that took out her virginity, and so therefore, it's not a good idea to compare it to a be'ula. So the Gemara says v'Rabbanan, and whereas the Rabbanan say adam edamu lebe'ula, edamu lebegeres. And then the Gemara says, according to Rabbanan, why are you comparing her to a girl who's had intercourse? Why don't you compare her to Bogeres, where it disintegrates on its own? Gemara says, Bogeres, or some of them might call the Bogeres, there is no action whatsoever. It just disintegrated on its own. But in this case, she did an action. She put the stick in there. There was a stick that went into her and caused it to break. But by the Bogeres, nothing happened at all. So the Gemara says, so what did we just say? That Rabbi Barchami said, but if he doesn't actually know this, if he doesn't actually know that she is that her basula is no longer intact, everybody says she doesn't get anything. The Gemara says, Masav Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman challenges this. Rav Nachman challenges this from what we're going to get to on the Mishnah on Daf Yomi, where it says, "He omeres mukas eitzani." She says, "I am mukas eitz." She says, "No, it didn't. You didn't lose your hymen from a piece of wood. You lost it from a man. A man trampled upon you." As Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Lezer omrim, then menace. Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Lezer said, under those circumstances, we believe her. We believe her under those circumstances. We believe her. And so then there's the presumption that she did not have the intercourse, but she was mukas eitz, and she gets a ksuva. And in the Mishnah there, it shows that Rabbi Yoshua argues on this. And we see from this Mishnah that even though the Baal did not realize that she was a mukas eitz, if she claims that she was a mukas eitz, she gets the ksuva. So how can you say if he thinks she's a mukas eitz and it turns out she's not, she gets nothing? It doesn't make sense. So therefore, based upon this question that Rav Nachman asks, Rava comes along and says, "Elam Rava bein hikirba, bein lo hikirba, Rabbi Meir, ksuba masayim, Rabbanan." So he says as follows: Rabbi Meir says whether or not he knew that she was mukas eitz or not, her ksuba is 200. Rabbanan, but according to Rabbanan, there's a distinction. Hikirba, if he knew that she was mukas eitz mana, she'll only get 100. Lo hikirba. But if he didn't know she was a mukas eitz, he doesn't get anything. She doesn't get anything. V'hadar be Rava. However, the Gemara says that Rava recanted this position. That Rava says that the Rabbanan say that Rava recanted this position in which he said that according to the Rabbanan, that if he doesn't. So Rava recanted from this position. What did he recant from? Says Gemara. Says Rashi. Rava recanted this position where he said if the rabbis didn't realize she was mukas eitz, she gets nothing. So Rava recants and he says, actually, she does. Even the Rabbanan say that if he didn't realize she was mukas eitz, she gets 100. So the Gemara says, how do we know that Rava recanted? Tanya, because Rava says, what is this idea that if you give a false testimony about a woman, that it's called you spread lies about the woman? Bala based in the Amar. If a person comes to the court and he says, Ploni Lamatsasi, Bala based in Amar, and he says Ploni, and Ploni says, I did not discover that your daughter was a virgin. I didn't find her to be a virgin. So under those circumstances, if there were witnesses that she was adulterous, she has to pay a ksuba of 100. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about if there was witnesses that she was zinta, that she was adulterous? Of course she gets stoned. She doesn't get a ksuba of 100, she gets stoned. The Gemara says, zinta meikara yeshla ksuba. No, it means that if she had relations before she became engaged, then she gets a ksuba of 100. Amar B'chia bar Av and Amar Av Sheiches. Zoso Maris. This teaches us concept of cheskas pesua This teaches us the idea if you married her thinking she's a Pesula, and then you discover she's not a virgin, she doesn't get nothing, she gets 100. Umasiv Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman challenges this from the Mishnah, which says, let's say you marry the woman and you don't find her to be a virgin, and he marries Misha Rastani Nastani. She says, I was assaulted once I was already engaged. It's your bad luck. You thought I was a virgin, but guess what? I was assaulted, and tough on you. You still have to give me the 200 because when we got engaged, I was a virgin. He says, no, you lost your virginity, and I thought you were a virgin, and you weren't, and it all happened before we were engaged. And therefore, I have a leisla, and I don't owe you anything. And so therefore, you see that if he marries her, thinks she's a virgin, he doesn't pay, and she's not a virgin, he doesn't pay her 100, he pays her nothing. And Rav Chia Bar Avin said, and these circumstances said to Rav Nachman, is it possible that Rav Amram and all the Gedolei Ador were sitting there when Rav Sheshes said this question, the Kashilu, and he asked this question, Vishani, and Rav Sheshes answered, my mekachtos. What's his claim that he's that it's a mekachtos? Doesn't it say Nami Milasayim of money is slave? He's asking this question that if he says the mekachtos, then you only pay 100, and you're saying from here you pay nothing. And the one who challenged Rav Nachman from this Mishnah asked a good question, because mikachtos is dami mashna. Because mikachtos implies that you pay nothing. So therefore, it's a question from this price from the Moti Shema. And Taretz ve'inachi, and so therefore you have to explain what the price is saying. If there are witnesses that she was adulterous under him, she gets skila. Zinta meikara v'lo. And if she was adulterous initially, she pays nothing. Then he pays nothing. So this teaches us. So if she was a mukes eight, she would get at least 100. So the fact that Rava says that if she was Mukas 8, she gets 100. This, according to Rabbanan, this proves that Rava recanted his position that the Rabbanan say if she was Mukas 8, she gets nothing at all. All right, I'll take any questions about this. We'll stop here. I'll take any questions.